The room went silent when the drunk man slapped $20 on the bar and said he was selling his daughter. Everyone looked away, except one man who couldn't. What happened next in that mountain town would break a hardened loner, save a terrified child, and prove that sometimes the most broken people are the ones who know how to fight for what matters. This is their story. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The November wind cut through Stone Hollow like a dull blade, cold enough to hurt, but not clean enough to numb. Caleb Rowan felt it against his face as he tied his horse outside Mercer's Tavern, the only place in town that didn't ask questions about men who came down from the high country smelling like pine smoke and loneliness. He wasn't supposed to be here. The plan had been simple: trade furs, buy supplies, get back to the cabin before dark. But the trading post had shorted him on the pelts, claimed 2 weren't cured right, which was bullshit, and the sun was already dropping behind the mountains. 1 drink, he told himself, just 1 to take the edge off before the 5-hour climb home. The tavern was nearly empty. A few miners hunched over cards in the corner, their faces gray with coal dust and exhaustion. Old Samuel Mercer stood behind the bar, polishing glasses that would never be clean, and near the window sat a man Caleb had seen around town before, Dale Pritchard, a logger who'd lost his job when the mill closed. The man's hands shook as he lifted a bottle to his lips. Caleb took a stool at the far end of the bar. Whiskey. Mercer poured without comment. That was the thing about this place. Nobody cared who you were or why you looked like you'd been chewed up by the mountains and spit back out. They just poured and kept their mouths shut. The whiskey burned going down. Good. Caleb needed something to feel besides the constant ache in his chest, the one that had lived there for 6 years, ever since the fever took Sarah and baby Emma in the same week. The cabin had been full then, full of laughter and crying and the smell of Sarah's bread baking. Now it was just him and the ghosts. He was halfway through his second glass when Dale Pritchard started talking. "I'm serious," the man said, his voice thick with drink. "I got nothing left. The house is gone. The bank took it last week." One of the miners glanced over but said nothing. "I can't feed her anymore," Dale continued, and something in his tone made Caleb's shoulders tense. "It ain't right keeping her when I got nothing to give. A man's got to be practical." Caleb kept his eyes on his glass. Other people's problems weren't his business. He'd learned that the hard way. $20, Dale said suddenly, louder now. "That's all I'm asking. $20 and she's yours. She's small, but she's strong. Works hard. Doesn't complain." The words hit Caleb like a fist. He turned slowly on his stool. Dale Pritchard sat alone at his table, and beside him, pressed against the wall like she was trying to disappear into it, was a girl. Maybe 8 years old, maybe 10, hard to tell with the way hunger had hollowed out her face. Her dress was too thin for November, patched in places with fabric that didn't match. Her hair hung in dirty tangles around her shoulders. But it was her eyes that stopped Caleb cold, flat and dark, and already knowing things no child should know. $20, Dale said again, this time looking around the room like he was addressing an audience. "Any of you want her? She can cook, clean, whatever you need." The miners looked away. Mercer kept polishing his glass. The whole room held its breath, waiting for this moment to pass so they could pretend it never happened. And Caleb saw his sister, not the girl, his sister, Ruth, 14 years old, standing in their father's house while their old man counted money from a man in a nice suit. Ruth's hand had been so small in Caleb's. She'd looked at him with eyes that begged him to do something, anything, and he'd stood there, frozen, useless. He was 16 and thought he was a man, but when it mattered, he'd been nothing. He never saw Ruth again after that day. Nobody? Dale's voice cracked. He wasn't a monster, Caleb realized, just a man who'd been broken by circumstances until there was nothing left but desperation. That almost made it worse. "Come on, somebody must need help around their place. She eats like a bird. Won't cost you much to keep." The girl hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound. She just stared at the table in front of her like if she stayed still enough, she might stop existing. Caleb's hands were shaking. The whiskey glass rattled when he set it down. "She's a good girl," Dale said, and there were tears in his voice now. I don't want to do this, but I can't. There's no food. There's nothing left. Someone's got to take care of her and I can't. I just can't anymore." One of the miners stood up, started for the door. "Please," Dale said. The miner kept walking. Caleb watched him go. Watched everyone in that room decide that this wasn't their problem, that they couldn't fix the world's ugliness, that looking away was the same as innocence. He thought about his cabin, 5 hours away. Thought about the silence that waited there. The cold that never quite left even with the fire going. Thought about Sarah's voice. "You're a good man, Caleb Rowan. Don't you forget it." He hadn't been good in a long time. "I'll take her." The words came out before he'd decided to say them. The whole room turned to look at him. This stranger with a scarred face and clothes that smelled like smoke and animal pelts. Dale blinked. "What?" "I said I'll take her." Caleb reached into his coat and pulled out his money pouch. His hands were still shaking as he counted out bills. $15. That was all he had left after the trading post had cheated him. "I got 15, that's all I have." "The price is 20, Dale said, but there was something desperate and relieved in his face. "Then I guess you better decide if you want $15 or nothing at all." The silence stretched. The girl still hadn't looked up. Dale grabbed the money. "She's yours then. Her name's Lila. She'll do what you tell her." He stood up fast like he was afraid Caleb might change his mind. Didn't even look at the girl as he headed for the door. "She's a good worker. You won't regret it." Then he was gone, and Caleb was alone with the child he'd just bought like livestock. Lila lifted her head slowly. Her eyes met Caleb's, and he saw terror there, pure animal terror. She thought she knew what came next. A man buys a girl and then... "No," Caleb said quickly. His voice came out rough. "It's not... That's not what this is." She didn't believe him. Why would she? "Come on," he said, softer now. "Let's get out of here." She didn't move, just kept staring at him with those dark, knowing eyes. Caleb stood up slowly, making sure his movements were careful. Not threatening. He'd gentled enough wild animals to know that sudden moves meant danger. "I'm not going to hurt you, I promise. But we need to leave. It's a long ride to my place, and it gets dark fast this time of year." "Where?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "My cabin, up in the high country." "Why?" It was a fair question. Caleb didn't have a good answer. "Because your father just sold you to a room full of people who pretended not to notice, and I couldn't..." He stopped, started again. "Because I should have done something a long time ago, and I didn't. Maybe this makes up for it a little." She stood up slowly. She was even smaller than he'd thought, barely reaching his chest. The dress hung off her like it belonged to someone else. Probably did. "You got anything you need to bring?" he asked. She shook her head. "Okay then." They walked out together, and Caleb felt every eye in that tavern on his back. Let them look. Let them judge. At least he'd done something. Outside, the cold hit hard. Lila wrapped her thin arms around herself, shivering. Caleb shrugged off his coat and held it out to her. She flinched back. "It's just a coat," he said. "You're going to freeze without it." She took it slowly, like it might bite. It swallowed her whole, the sleeves hanging past her hands, the bottom dragging on the ground. She looked like a child playing dress-up, except there was nothing playful about any of this. Caleb's horse, a big sorrel gelding named Red, stood where he'd left him. The animal nickered softly, impatient to get going. "You ever ride a horse?" Caleb asked. Lila shook her head. "All right, I'm going to lift you up, okay? Just going to put you in the saddle." She went rigid when he touched her, but she didn't fight. He lifted her easily, she weighed almost nothing, and settled her on Red's back. The horse shifted but stayed calm. Caleb swung up behind her. "Hold on to the saddle horn. That's the knob right in front of you. If you feel like you're slipping, tell me." She gripped the horn with both hands, her knuckles white. They rode out of Stone Hollow as the sun touched the mountain peaks. The town disappeared behind them, swallowed by pine trees and distance. The only sounds were the horses' hooves on the rocky trail and the wind moving through the branches. Lila hadn't said a word since they left. An hour passed, then 2. The temperature dropped as they climbed. Caleb felt the girl shivering in front of him, even with his coat wrapped around her. "We'll stop soon," he said. "Let the horse rest. Get some food in you." No response. The trail got steeper. Red picked his way carefully over loose stones and fallen logs. This was no place to be after dark, but they didn't have a choice now. The cabin was still 3 hours away, maybe more with a tired horse. They came to a flat spot where a stream cut across the trail. Caleb dismounted and lifted Lila down. She immediately moved away from him, putting space between them. "Stay where I can see you," he said. "There's bears around here sometimes." He led Red to the stream to drink. The animal was breathing hard, lathered despite the cold. They'd pushed too fast. Caleb pulled jerky and a hunk of bread from his saddlebag, the last of his food until they got to the cabin. "Here," he said, holding it out to Lila. She stared at it. "You need to eat. You eat it. I'm not hungry. Take it." She took the food slowly, like it might disappear if she moved too fast. Then she ate like she hadn't seen food in days. Probably hadn't. Caleb watched her, feeling something twist in his chest. What the hell had he done? He couldn't take care of a kid. He barely took care of himself. What was he going to do when they got to the cabin? Teach her to trap? Show her how to skin rabbits? She should be in school, learning to read, playing with other children, not climbing mountains with a man who'd forgotten how to be human. But he'd made the choice, and unlike with Ruth, he wasn't going to walk it back. "What happened to your mother?" he asked. Lila's jaw tightened. She chewed slowly, not looking at him. "She left 2 years ago. Said she couldn't do it anymore." "Do what?" "Be poor. Be married to him. Be my mother." Her voice was flat. Facts, not feelings. "Dale said she ran off with a railroad man. He started drinking after that. Lost his job. Lost everything." "I'm sorry." She looked at him, then really looked at him. "Why'd you buy me?" Caleb sat down on a rock, suddenly tired. "I had a sister once, Ruth. My father sold her when I was 16. I didn't stop him. I should have, but I didn't." "What happened to her?" "I don't know. I never saw her again." He met Lila's eyes. "I'm not going to let that happen to you. Whatever else happens, you're safe, you understand?" She didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. They rode the last 3 hours in darkness. The trail was dangerous at night. One wrong step and Red could break a leg or worse, but Caleb knew this mountain like he knew his own hands. Every switchback, every loose section, every place where the path narrowed to nothing. Lila fell asleep against him somewhere around hour 2. He felt her weight go slack, her head lolling against his chest. He wrapped one arm around her to keep her from falling, and she didn't wake up. The cabin appeared suddenly, a dark shape against darker trees. Caleb had built it himself 7 years ago, when he and Sarah first came up here looking for a fresh start. They'd wanted space. Quiet. A place to raise their daughter away from the noise and dirt of town. The cabin had failed to save them. The fever didn't care about fresh air and clean water. It took them anyway. Caleb dismounted carefully, holding Lila so she wouldn't fall. She woke up when he lifted her down, her eyes wide and confused. "We're here," he said. "This is home." It didn't look like much in the dark, just a small log structure with a sagging porch and a stone chimney. But it was solid, warm, safe. He led Lila inside while Red snorted impatiently outside. The cabin was freezing, the fire long dead. Caleb got Lila settled on the bed in the corner, the same bed where Sarah had died, though he didn't tell her that, and went to work building a fire. The kindling caught quickly. Flames spread, pushing back the darkness. Caleb added bigger logs until the fire was roaring, heat finally starting to fill the small space. When he turned around, Lila was standing in the middle of the room, looking around with an expression he couldn't read. "There's blankets on the bed," he said. "You should sleep. It's late." She didn't move, just kept looking at him with those dark, careful eyes. "What?" he asked. "Where are you going to sleep?" "I got a bedroll. I'll be fine." "Why can't you sleep in the bed?" "Because that's your bed now." She processed this. "What do you want from me?" The question hung in the air between them. Caleb felt something crack open in his chest, someplace he'd kept sealed shut since Sarah died. "Nothing," he said. "I don't want anything from you." "Everyone wants something." "Yeah, well, I'm not everyone." He grabbed his bedroll from the corner and spread it out near the fire. "Get some sleep, Lila. We'll figure the rest out tomorrow." She stood there for another minute, then slowly walked to the bed. She sat on the edge, still wearing his too big coat, still looking like she might bolt at any second. Caleb lay down and closed his eyes. He was exhausted, bone-tired in a way that went beyond just physical fatigue. But sleep didn't come. He listened to Lila's breathing across the room, listened to the fire pop and crackle, listened to the wind move through the pines outside. And he thought about choices, about the ones we make and the ones we don't, about his sister Ruth standing in their father's house with her small hand in his, about Sarah whispering in the dark that he was a good man, about a drunk logger in a tavern trying to sell his daughter for $20, about a girl named Lila who'd learned too young that love was just another thing people traded when they ran out of options. He'd brought her here, saved her maybe, or maybe just delayed the inevitable. Either way, she was his responsibility now, his choice. He hoped to hell it was the right one. Across the room, Lila finally lay down. The bed creaked, the blankets rustled, and then, so quietly he almost didn't hear it. "Thank you." Caleb opened his eyes, stared at the ceiling beams he'd cut and placed himself. "Get some sleep, kid." Silence. Then, "My name's Lila." "I know. What's yours?" Caleb Rowan." "Okay." A pause. "Good night, Caleb." "Good night, Lila." The fire burned low. The wind kept moving through the trees. And two broken people, one who'd lost everything, one who'd never had anything to lose, slept in a cabin high in the Rocky Mountains, while the world outside stayed cold and hard and indifferent as always. But inside, for the first time in 6 years, Caleb Rowan's home wasn't empty. And maybe that was enough. Morning came hard and bright through the cabin's single window. Caleb woke to find Lila already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed with her hands folded in her lap, watching him like she was waiting for something bad to happen. "You sleep okay?" he asked, pushing himself up from the bedroll. His back complained. He wasn't young anymore, and sleeping on the floor reminded him of that fact. She nodded, but didn't speak. The fire had burned down to coals. Caleb fed it fresh wood and got it going again, then pulled on his boots. The morning routine felt strange with someone else here. For 6 years, he'd moved through these tasks alone, building the fire, making coffee, checking the weather. Now there was a small person watching his every move, and he felt clumsy under that scrutiny. "You hungry?" he asked. Another nod. He had dried venison hanging from the rafters, some potatoes in a crate, flour and cornmeal in sealed tins. Not much, but enough. He'd need to hunt soon. Winter was coming fast, and his stores were lower than they should be. He hadn't been planning on feeding 2 people. He put a pot of water on to boil and started slicing potatoes. The knife felt heavy in his hand. He kept thinking about what Lila had asked last night. "What do you want from me?" Like she'd already learned that kindness was just a transaction, that nothing came free. "You know how to cook?" he asked, just to fill the silence. "Some. Dale taught me before." She stopped. "Before everything went bad." "What can you make?" "Beans, cornbread, eggs if we had chickens." She watched him work. "Dale said I burned the bacon too much." "Bacon's supposed to be crispy. Dale was wrong about that." Caleb added the potatoes to the boiling water. "You'll learn more up here. Have to. Can't run to town every time you need something." She processed this quietly. Then, "How far away is town?" 5 hours on horseback, longer on foot." "You live here all alone?" "Yeah." "Why?" It was a simple question with a complicated answer. Caleb stirred the potatoes, watching them bounce in the rolling water. "Used to live here with my wife and daughter. They died. Fever took them both in the same week, back in '84. I stayed because leaving felt like giving up on them somehow." He glanced at Lila. "Probably doesn't make sense." "It makes sense," she said quietly. They ate in silence, boiled potatoes with salt and strips of dried venison. Lila ate slowly, carefully, like she was afraid the food might disappear. Caleb noticed she kept glancing at him, waiting for him to take his portion first before she'd touch hers. After breakfast, he showed her around the cabin. It didn't take long. The place was maybe 20 feet by 20 feet, with the bed in one corner, a rough table and 2 chairs in the middle, shelves along one wall holding supplies, and the fireplace taking up most of the far wall. A ladder led up to a small loft where Caleb stored furs and extra gear. "It's not much," he said, "but it's warm and it's dry and the roof doesn't leak, mostly." Lila ran her hand along the log wall. "You built this?" "Me and Sarah. Took us most of a summer. She was better with the chinking than I was, had smaller hands, could get into the gaps easier." He pointed to the window. She insisted on glass, said she wasn't going to live somewhere she couldn't see the mountains. Where are they buried? The question caught him off guard. Most people danced around death, used soft words to cushion the blow. But Lila just asked straight. Out back, under the big pine. He moved to the door. I'll show you. Outside, the November air bit through his shirt. The sky was sharp blue, the kind of cold clarity that only came at altitude. Snow dusted the peaks above them, and Caleb knew they had maybe 2 weeks before the first real storm hit. He led Lila around the cabin to where 2 wooden crosses stood under a massive ponderosa pine. Sarah Rowan, the first one read, 1858 to 1884. Beloved wife. The second was smaller. Emma Grace Rowan, born and died April 1884. Lila stood looking at the graves for a long moment. How old was she? Emma? 3 weeks. Caleb's voice came out rough. Barely had time to know her before... He stopped, swallowed hard. Sarah got sick first, tried to keep feeding Emma, even while she was burning up with fever. Then Emma got it too. I rode to town for a doctor, but by the time we got back, he didn't finish, didn't need to. I'm sorry, Lila said. Yeah, me too. They stood there in the cold while the wind moved through the pine branches overhead. Caleb hadn't brought anyone out here before. Hadn't wanted to share this grief with anyone. But something about Lila's presence made it bearable. Maybe because she carried her own losses. Maybe because she didn't try to make it better with empty words. Come on, he said finally. Got work to do before winter sets in proper. The next few days fell into a rhythm. Caleb had gotten soft living alone. He could go days without talking, without seeing another human face. But having Lila there forced him back into the world of words and explanations. He showed her how to split kindling without taking off a finger, how to bank the fire at night so it would last until morning, how to read the weather by watching the clouds move over the peaks, how to tell if meat was spoiled, how to patch clothes with what you had on hand. She learned fast, picked things up after one demonstration and remembered them. But she barely spoke unless he asked her a direct question, and she still flinched every time he moved too quickly. On the 4th day, Caleb decided it was time to teach her to shoot. Why? She asked when he pulled the rifle down from above the door. Because you need to know how. Up here, a gun's not about wanting to hurt something. It's about survival. You need to be able to hunt. Need to be able to protect yourself if I'm not around. He checked the rifle, made sure it was unloaded. Sarah hated guns, wouldn't touch one. I respected that, but he stopped. I was gone when she got sick, down in Stone Hollow, trading furs. If she'd been able to signal for help, fire off a shot or two, maybe someone would have heard. Maybe they could have gotten to town faster than I did. Lila took this in. You think she'd still be alive if she'd known how to shoot? I don't know. Maybe. Maybe not. He met her eyes. But I'm not taking that chance again. Anyone who lives up here needs to know how to handle a gun. They went outside to the clearing where Caleb had set up a target, an old flour sack stuffed with pine needles and hung from a tree branch. The morning was cold enough that their breath came out in clouds. This is a Winchester Model 1873, Caleb said, holding the rifle so she could see it. Fires a .44 4-40 cartridge. It's got some kick to it, so you need to hold it firm. He demonstrated the stance, feet shoulder-width apart, rifle butt tucked tight against his shoulder. You're going to feel it when you pull the trigger. Don't let it scare you. He loaded a single round and handed her the rifle. It looked enormous in her small hands. She struggled to hold it steady, the barrel wavering. Here. Caleb moved behind her, adjusting her grip. She went rigid at his touch, and he immediately stepped back. You need to pull it in tighter. The stock goes right against your shoulder. Line up the sight with the target and breathe out slow. When you're ready, squeeze the trigger. Don't jerk it. Lila raised the rifle again. Her arms shook from the weight. Take your time, Caleb said. She aimed for a long moment, then pulled the trigger. The crack of the gunshot echoed off the mountains. The recoil knocked Lila back a step, and she nearly dropped the rifle. The shot went wild, hitting a tree trunk 10 feet left of the target. Good, Caleb said. First time's always rough. Try again. They spent the next hour burning through ammunition. Lila's arms had to be screaming by the end of it, but she didn't complain. Her shots got better, not accurate yet, but better. She started anticipating the recoil, leaning into it instead of fighting it. "That's enough for today," Caleb said when he noticed her hands shaking from exhaustion. "You did good." She lowered the rifle, and for the first time since he'd bought her out of that tavern, she almost smiled. "I hit the target twice." "You did. Give it a few more weeks and you'll be out shooting me." They walked back to the cabin together. Lila carried the rifle like it was precious, and Caleb felt something shift in his chest. She was starting to trust him. Not all the way. That would take time, but enough to learn. Enough to try. That night over dinner, rabbit stew made from an animal Caleb had trapped that morning, Lila finally asked the question he'd been waiting for. "What happens when winter comes?" "We stay put mostly. Snow gets too deep to travel, and it's not safe to be out when the storms hit. We'll have enough food if I hunt smart. Got plenty of firewood stacked. We'll be fine." "And then what? After winter?" Caleb set down his spoon. "What do you mean?" "I mean," she struggled with the words. "Dale sold me. So I'm yours now, I guess. But what does that mean? What are you going to do with me?" There it was, the real question underneath all the others. "I'm not going to do anything with you," Caleb said carefully. "You're not property, Lila. I didn't buy you like you were a horse or a piece of furniture. I bought you away from a bad situation. But you paid for me." "Yeah, I did, and I'd do it again." He leaned forward. "Look, I don't know what happens next. I didn't think any of this through before I opened my mouth in that tavern. But here's what I do know. You're safe here. Nobody's going to hurt you or sell you or treat you like you're worth less than you are. You can stay as long as you want. And when you're old enough, if you want to leave, I won't stop you." She stared at him. "Why would you let me leave?" "Because you're not a prisoner. You're a kid who got dealt a bad hand, and I'm trying to—" He stopped. Started again. "My sister Ruth, the one I told you about. After my father sold her, I used to wonder what happened to her. If whoever bought her was kind, if she was okay. I never found out, but I promised myself that if I ever got the chance to be the kind of person who didn't look away, I would. So I'm here because you feel guilty about your sister?" The words stung because they were partly true. "Maybe at first, but now—" He met her eyes. "Now you're here because I want you to be. Because this cabin's too quiet with just me in it. Because teaching you to shoot today felt like something worth doing. Is that a good enough reason?" Lila was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Dale used to tell me I was a burden, that I was the reason everything went bad. Dale was wrong." "How do you know?" "Because kids aren't burdens. They're just kids. They didn't ask to be born into whatever mess their parents made." Caleb pushed his bowl away. "Your father's problems weren't your fault. None of it was." She looked like she wanted to believe him but couldn't quite get there. "What if I mess up? What if I can't learn fast enough, or I eat too much food, or—" "Then you mess up. It's not the end of the world." He softened his voice. "Lila, I don't expect you to be perfect. I just expect you to try. That's all." She nodded slowly, and Caleb could see her processing this, trying to fit it into the worldview she'd built where love was conditional and safety was temporary. They were still figuring each other out when the first visitor came. It was late afternoon, 6 days after Caleb had brought Lila home. He was outside splitting wood while Lila practiced her reading inside. She'd found Sarah's old Bible on a shelf and was working through it slowly, sounding out words she didn't know. The Bible was the only book in the cabin, and Caleb wasn't religious, but Sarah had treasured it, and he'd kept it after she died. He heard the horse before he saw it, hoofbeats on the trail, slow and steady. He set down the axe and moved to where his rifle leaned against the cabin wall. The rider came into view a minute later. A woman, maybe 40, wearing a dark coat and sitting side saddle on a gray mare. Caleb recognized her after a moment, Martha Donnelly, who ran the general store in Stone Hollow with her husband. "Mrs. Donnelly," he called out, keeping his hand near the rifle. "Long ride up here." She pulled her horse to a stop 20 feet from the cabin. "Mr. Rowan, I hope I'm not intruding." "Depends on why you're here." Martha dismounted carefully, her eyes scanning the cabin and the clearing around it. "Word's gotten around town about what you did, buying Dale Pritchard's girl. That was my business. People are talking, wondering if it's right, a man living alone with a child that's not his. Caleb felt anger flash hot in his chest. People can talk all they want. Doesn't change anything. I'm not here to judge, Martha said quickly. I'm here because I wanted to see for myself that the girl's all right, that she's being treated proper. She's fine. I'd like to see her, talk to her. Caleb considered sending Martha away, but he knew that would only make the talk worse, make people think he had something to hide. And maybe it would be good for Lila to see another woman, someone who wasn't him. Wait here, he said. He went inside. Lila was sitting at the table with the Bible open in front of her, but she'd stopped reading. She must have heard the voices. There's a woman outside, Mrs. Donnelly from the general store. She wants to talk to you. Fear flashed across Lila's face. Why? Because people in town are talking, wondering if you're okay up here. She wants to see for herself. He crouched down so he was at eye level with her. You don't have to talk to her if you don't want, but it might help if you do. Might make people stop asking questions. What should I say? The truth. Are you okay here? Lila looked around the cabin, at the warm fire, the shelves stocked with food, the bed that was hers now. Yeah, she said quietly. I'm okay. Then tell her that. They went outside together. Martha's expression changed when she saw Lila. The girl was cleaner now than she'd been in the tavern, her hair washed and braided, wearing one of Sarah's old dresses that Caleb had cut down to fit her. She looked like a child instead of a ghost. Hello, dear, Martha said softly. I'm Mrs. Donnelly. Do you remember me from the store? Lila nodded. I heard about what happened, about your father and... Martha glanced at Caleb, then back to Lila. I wanted to make sure you're all right, that Mr. Rowan is treating you well. He is, Lila said. You have enough to eat? A warm place to sleep? Yes, ma'am. Martha moved closer, and Caleb tensed, but she just knelt down so she was at Lila's height. Sweetie, if you're scared or if something's wrong, you can tell me. I can help you. I'm not scared, Lila said, and there was steel in her voice that hadn't been there before. Caleb's teaching me things, how to shoot and cook and survive up here. She paused. He's good to me. Martha studied her for a long moment, then straightened up. All right then. She turned to Caleb. The law might have questions. Sheriff Coleman's been asking about the situation. Let him ask. I've got nothing to hide. People say you paid Dale $15 for her. I paid $15 to get her away from a man who was selling his child to drunks in a tavern. There's a difference. Is there? In the eyes of the law? Caleb's jaw tightened. I don't know. But I know what's right and what's not, and leaving that girl in that situation wasn't right. So whatever the law says, I can live with what I did. Martha was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I brought some things. For the girl. She walked back to her horse and pulled a bundle from her saddlebag. Some clothes that my daughter outgrew. A few books. Figured she might need them. She handed the bundle to Lila, who took it carefully. Thank you, Lila said. You're welcome, dear. Martha looked at Caleb. I'll tell people what I saw here, that the girl seems well cared for. But you should know, there are folks in town who think this whole thing is wrong, who think that child should be with a proper family, not up here with a hermit. A proper family, Caleb repeated. Like the father who sold her? Or like all those good people in the tavern who pretended not to notice? Martha had the grace to look uncomfortable. I'm just telling you what people are saying. Noted. She mounted her horse and turned it back toward the trail. Take care of her, Mr. Rowan. I mean it. I will. They watched her ride away until the trees swallowed her up and they were alone again. Are they going to take me away? Lila asked quietly. Not if I can help it. Caleb rested his hand on her shoulder, and for the first time she didn't flinch. Come on, let's see what she brought you. Inside they opened the bundle. There were 3 dresses, all well made and hardly worn, 2 pairs of boots, a warm coat, and at the bottom, 3 books, a reader, a book of fairy tales, and a slim volume of poetry. Lila ran her fingers over the books like they were treasure. You like to read? Caleb asked. I used to. Before... She stopped. Dale said books were a waste of time, sold most of ours when the money ran out. Well, you can read as much as you want here. No such thing as wasted time if you're learning something. That night, Lila read aloud from the fairy tales book while Caleb worked on repairing a harness. Her voice was soft and uncertain at first, but it got stronger as she went. The The stories were the usual things, princesses and talking animals and magic that solved every problem. Caleb didn't believe in magic anymore, but he liked hearing her read, liked the sound of another voice in the cabin. She fell asleep in the middle of a story about a girl who lived in a tower. Caleb marked the page and carried her to bed, and she didn't wake up, just curled into the blankets with that same guarded look she wore even in sleep. He sat by the fire for a long time after that, thinking about what Martha had said. The law might have questions. People thought this was wrong. Maybe it was wrong. Maybe he had no business raising a child when he'd failed so completely to save his own. Maybe Lila would be better off with a real family, people who knew how to be parents instead of just a broken man who'd spent 6 years hiding from the world. But when he looked at her sleeping there, safe and warm and fed, he couldn't make himself believe it. She'd been dying in that town, maybe not physically, but in every way that mattered. And up here, she was starting to come alive again. That had to count for something. The days got shorter and colder. Caleb took Lila hunting, teaching her to track deer through the snow, to read the signs animals left behind. She was small and quiet, and could move through the woods like a ghost when she wanted to. They got a big buck one morning, Lila's shot that brought it down after Caleb had tracked it for 2 hours. She'd been so proud she'd actually laughed, and the sound had hit Caleb like a physical thing. He taught her to dress the kill, even though she turned green halfway through. "You don't waste anything up here," he explained. "Meat for eating, hide for leather, bones for tools. Nothing gets thrown away." She learned to set snares for rabbits, to ice fish in the stream when it froze over, to tell poisonous plants from safe ones, to navigate by the stars. And slowly, bit by bit, she started talking. Not a lot. She was still guarded, still waiting for the other shoe to drop. But she'd ask questions now, tell him things. "Dale used to say my mother left because I cried too much as a baby," she said one day while they were cleaning fish. "Is that true? Can a baby cry too much?" "No," Caleb said firmly. "Babies cry. That's what they do. Your mother left because she had her own problems, not because of anything you did." "How do you know?" "Because I watched Sarah with Emma. Even when Emma cried all night and we were both exhausted, Sarah never once acted like our daughter was a burden. Parents who love their kids don't leave because things get hard." Lila was quiet, processing this. Then, "Did you love Emma?" "More than anything." The words hurt to say but felt necessary. "I only got 3 weeks with her, but yeah, I loved her." "Do you think she would have liked it up here when she got older?" Caleb smiled despite the ache in his chest. "I think she would have driven me crazy asking questions about everything. She'd have been like you, wanting to know how things work, why things are the way they are." "I'm like her?" "A little. You both had that same stubborn streak." Layla almost smiled at that. The first big storm hit in early December. Caleb had been watching the clouds build over the mountains for 2 days, recognizing the signs. He made sure they had enough firewood stacked inside, enough food and water to last a week if they needed it. The snow started during the night. Caleb woke to the sound of wind screaming around the cabin and the temperature dropping fast even with the fire going. He added more wood and checked the gaps around the door and windows, making sure they were sealed tight. Lila woke up shivering. "What's happening?" "Blizzard. It's going to get bad." He pulled another blanket from the shelf and wrapped it around her shoulders. "We're going to stay inside until it passes. Could be a day, could be 3. We'll be fine as long as we keep the fire going and don't panic." By noon, the snow was 2 feet deep and still falling. The wind had turned the world outside into a white chaos. Visibility was maybe 10 feet. The cold was so intense it felt malicious, like something alive trying to kill them. They stayed close to the fire. Caleb had Lila read aloud to pass the time, and when she got tired of that, he told her stories about building the cabin, about the first winter he and Sarah had survived up here when they'd been young and stupid and unprepared. "We almost died that year," he admitted. "Ran out of food in February and had to survive on pine needle tea and whatever small game I could trap. Sarah lost so much weight I could count her ribs. When spring finally came, we both swore we'd never be that unprepared again." "But you stayed," Lila said. "We stayed. This place gets in your blood. Once you've lived up here, everything else feels too crowded, too loud. Do you think I'll feel that way?" Caleb looked at her, this small girl who'd been sold like livestock and who was now learning to survive in one of the harshest environments on Earth. "I think you'll feel however you feel. And whatever that is, it'll be okay. The storm lasted 3 days. On the second day, they heard wolves howling in the distance. Caleb made sure his rifle was loaded and within reach. They won't come near the cabin, he told Lila when he saw fear in her eyes. They're just passing through. But that night, something scratched at the door. Caleb grabbed the rifle and stood ready while Lila huddled on the bed. The scratching came again, insistent. "Stay back," Caleb ordered. He moved to the door and threw it open fast, rifle raised. A dog stood there, or what was left of one, half-starved, covered in ice, shaking so hard its legs could barely hold it up. It looked up at Caleb with desperate eyes. "Hell," Caleb muttered. He lowered the rifle. "Come on, then." The dog limped inside. It was some kind of shepherd mix, big-boned but wasted down to nothing. There was a rope collar around its neck, frayed like it had been tied somewhere and chewed itself free. Lila climbed down from the bed. "Is it going to bite?" "Might. Stay back until we know." Caleb set the rifle aside and approached the dog slowly. It watched him but didn't growl, just kept shaking. He got a blanket and wrapped the animal up, then pulled it close to the fire. The dog didn't fight. It just collapsed there like all its strength had given out at once. "Get some water," Caleb told Lila, "and tear off a piece of that venison, small piece." They fed the dog carefully. Too much at once would make it sick. It ate like it was terrified the food would disappear, then drank half the bowl of water before finally laying its head down. "Somebody's dog," Caleb said. "Got loose or maybe abandoned when people couldn't feed it anymore. Happens in hard winters." "Can we keep it?" Lila asked. "It might not survive the night, but if it does..." Caleb looked at the dog, then at Lila, saw the hope in her face, the first time she'd asked for anything since arriving. "If it survives, we'll see." The dog survived. By morning it was alert enough to lift its head, and by afternoon it was eating more steadily. Lila stayed by its side, talking to it softly, petting its matted fur. "We need to call it something," she said. "It's probably got a name already." "But we don't know what it is, so we should give it a new one." She thought for a minute. "What about Bear? It's big like a bear." Caleb couldn't help but smile. "Sure, Bear works." The storm broke on the third day. The sun came out hard and bright, turning the snow into a field of diamonds. Caleb dug a path to the woodpile and checked on Red in the small shelter he'd built for the horse. The animal was fine, just restless from being cooped up. Bear the dog recovered slowly. Within a week, it had put on weight and its coat was starting to shine. It followed Lila everywhere, and at night it slept by her bed like a guardian. "That dog loves you," Caleb observed one evening. Lila looked pleased. "Nobody ever loved me before, except maybe my mother, and I don't remember that." The words hung in the air. Caleb wanted to tell her that he was starting to care about her too, that having her here had filled some of the emptiness that had been eating him alive. But he didn't know how to say it without sounding like he was trying to replace Emma, or like he expected something in return. So instead he just said, "Well, you got Bear now, and he's not going anywhere." Lila smiled, a real smile this time, not the half thing she usually offered. "Yeah, I got Bear." Christmas came and went without much fanfare. Caleb didn't celebrate holidays anymore. They just reminded him of what he'd lost. But he made a special dinner for Lila anyway, using the last of his sugar to make something close to cake. It wasn't much, but her face lit up when she tasted it. "Dale never did Christmas," she said. "Not after Mother left." "Well, we're doing it now," Caleb said. "From now on." The words felt like a promise, like he was committing to something bigger than just keeping her safe through the winter. Like he was saying she belonged here, with him, for as long as she wanted. And judging by the way Lila looked at him, with something that might have been trust starting to bloom behind the fear, she understood what he meant. The new year came. The snow kept falling. And in a cabin high in the Rocky Mountains, a broken man and a damaged girl and a half-wild dog built something that almost felt like family. January brought a cold so brutal it felt personal, the kind that crept through every crack in the cabin walls and made breathing hurt. Caleb woke one morning to find ice crystals on the inside of the window, and Lila huddled under every blanket they owned, still shivering. "Fire's dying," she said through chattering teeth. Caleb cursed himself. He'd let it burn too low during the night, trying to conserve wood. Stupid. He fed the flames until they roared back to life, then checked their wood supply. They had maybe 3 days left if they were careful. 4 weeks of winter still ahead, maybe more. "I need to cut more," he said. "Can't wait for it to warm up." Lila sat up, wrapped in blankets like a small ghost. I'll help. Too cold. You stay inside with Bear. You can't do it alone. You said so yourself. 2 people work faster than 1. She was right, but the thought of taking her out in this weather made his stomach knot. Still, they didn't have a choice. They needed wood or they'd freeze. All right, but you do exactly what I say. The second you can't feel your fingers or toes, you tell me. Frostbite's nothing to mess with. They bundled up in every piece of clothing they owned and went out into air so cold it burned. The snow crunched under their boots, frozen solid. Caleb led the way to a stand of dead pines he'd marked earlier in the season. Already down, just needed to be cut and hauled back. They worked in silence, Caleb sawing while Lila gathered the pieces and stacked them. Bear stayed close, his breath coming out in clouds. The cold was vicious, working through their gloves and coats like they weren't even there. After an hour, Lila's lips had gone blue. Inside, Caleb ordered. Now! We're not done. I said inside, you're freezing. She wanted to argue but couldn't make her jaw work right. Caleb walked her back to the cabin, got her by the fire, rubbed warmth back into her hands. Her fingers were white at the tips, close to frostbite, but not quite there. You stay here, he said. I'll finish. It took him 3 more hours to cut enough wood to last another week. By the time he dragged the last load back to the cabin, his hands were numb, and his lungs felt raw from breathing frozen air. But they had wood. They'd survive another week. That night, huddled close to the fire with Lila reading aloud and Bear snoring at their feet, Caleb felt the weight of what he'd taken on. Keeping them alive up here was a constant battle. Against the cold, against hunger, against 100 things that could go wrong. One mistake and they'd die. Simple as that. You okay? Lila asked, looking up from her book. Yeah, just tired. You're thinking too loud. He almost smiled at that. How do you know what I'm thinking? Your face gets all tight when you're worried, like you're trying to solve a problem that doesn't have an answer. She closed the book. Are we going to be okay? Yeah, Caleb said, and he meant it. We're going to be fine. Just got to be smart and careful and not take stupid risks. Like going out in the cold to cut wood? That wasn't stupid. That was necessary. There's a difference. He poked at the fire, sending sparks up. Your father, Dale, did he ever talk to you about why things are the way they are? About how to survive when everything's going wrong? Lila shook her head. He just got drunk and blamed everyone else. Said it was the mill's fault, the bank's fault, my mother's fault. Never his. Some people are like that. Can't face their own failures, so they throw them on everyone around them. Caleb met her eyes. You're not responsible for what happened to him, Lila. You know that, right? She looked away. He said I was. Said if I'd been a boy, things would have been different. Said I cost too much to keep. The anger that flashed through Caleb was hot and immediate. Your father was weak. He took his pain and his failures, and he put them on a child who couldn't defend herself. That's not your fault. That's his. But what if he was right? What if I am too much trouble? You're not. Caleb said it firm enough that she looked back at him. You work hard. You learn fast. You don't complain even when things are hard. Any parent would be lucky to have you. Then why didn't he want me? The question cut deep. Caleb didn't have a good answer. Didn't understand how any parent could look at their child and see a burden instead of a gift. He'd only had 3 weeks with Emma before she died, but he would have given anything for more time. The idea of throwing that away was incomprehensible. I don't know, he said finally. Some people are just broken in ways that make them hurt the people who love them. It's not about you being worth loving. It's about him not knowing how. Lila absorbed this quietly. Then she said something that nearly stopped Caleb's heart. Do you know how? To love someone? The cabin was silent except for the fire crackling. Caleb thought about Sarah, about the way she'd smiled at him in the mornings, about Emma's tiny hand wrapped around his finger, about the 6 years since he'd lost them, living up here like he was already dead. I used to, he said. Not sure if I remember anymore. I think you do, Lila said. You just forgot what it feels like. Maybe. She went back to her book, but Caleb sat there thinking about her words long after she'd fallen asleep, wondering if she was right, wondering if he'd let grief turn him into something hard and closed off, too afraid of being hurt again to let anyone close. The next morning brought trouble. Caleb was outside checking the snares when he heard horses. 2 of them, coming up the trail fast. He grabbed his rifle and moved to where he could see the clearing. Sheriff Coleman rode into view first, a big man with a gray beard and hard eyes. Behind him came a younger man Caleb didn't recognize, wearing a deputy's badge. Caleb stepped out where they could see him, rifle held casual but ready. "Sheriff?" "Rowan." Coleman pulled his horse to a stop. "Need to talk to you." "So talk. Inside might be better." "I'm fine right here." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "This isn't a social call. There's been complaints made about your situation with the Pritchard girl." "What kind of complaints?" "The kind that question whether it's appropriate for a single man to be living up here alone with a child that's not his." Coleman glanced at the cabin. "Where is she?" "Inside, and she's staying inside." "I need to see her. Need to verify she's being treated properly." Caleb's grip on the rifle tightened. "She's fine. Fed, warm, safe. What else do you need to verify?" "That you haven't—" The sheriff stopped, started again. "Look, I know you think you did a good thing taking her out of that tavern, but the law sees it different. You paid money for a child. That's buying a human being, Rowan. That's illegal. So arrest me." "I might have to if you don't cooperate." They stared at each other across the frozen clearing. Caleb knew he was on thin ground here, knew the law could take Lila away if they decided to. But the thought of her going back to some town official who'd stick her in an orphanage or with a family that just wanted free labor made his blood run cold. "What do you want?" he asked. "I want to see the girl, talk to her without you standing over her shoulder. Then I want to understand what your intentions are here." "My intentions are to keep her alive and safe. That's it." "For how long? What happens when spring comes and you can travel again? You going to keep her up here forever?" Caleb hadn't thought that far ahead. "I don't know. That's the problem. You don't know what you're doing. You acted on impulse and now you're in over your head." Coleman's voice softened slightly. "I'm not saying you're a bad man, Rowan, but a child needs more than just food and shelter. She needs schooling, friends her own age, a woman's influence, things you can't provide up here." Before Caleb could respond, the cabin door opened. Lila stepped out, bare at her side. She looked small in the doorway, wearing Sarah's cut-down dress and those 2 big boots Martha Donnelly had brought. "I heard voices," she said. "Get back inside," Caleb told her. "No." She walked forward, and there was steel in her spine that hadn't been there 2 months ago. "You're here about me, aren't you?" Coleman dismounted. "Yes, miss. I'm Sheriff Coleman. I need to ask you some questions." "About whether Caleb's treating me right?" "Among other things." Lila looked at Caleb, then back at the sheriff. "He's teaching me to survive, to shoot and hunt and read. He makes sure I have enough to eat even when food's tight. He doesn't hit me or yell at me or tell me I'm worthless." Her voice got stronger. "Dale sold me in a bar full of men, and nobody did anything. Caleb did. So whatever questions you have, the answer is, I'm better off here than I was there." The sheriff studied her. "That may be true, but the law has concerns about a grown man living alone with a young girl. Do you understand what I'm saying?" "You think he bought me for—" She couldn't finish the sentence, but her face showed she understood. "He didn't. He's never—" She looked at Caleb again, and something passed between them. "He's been good to me. That's all. Child, if something's happened, if he's hurt you or forced you to do things, you can tell me. I'll make sure you're safe." "I am safe," Lila said, and there was fury in her voice now. "For the first time in my whole life, I'm safe. And you want to take that away because it doesn't look right to people in town who didn't care when my father was selling me?" Coleman had the grace to look uncomfortable. "It's not that simple." "It is that simple. You either believe me or you don't." The sheriff looked at his deputy, then back at Lila. "I need you to understand something. The law exists to protect children. Even if you say you're fine, I have a duty to make sure that's true." "So what are you going to do? Take me back to Stone Hollow? Give me to some family that wants free labor? Stick me in an orphanage?" Lila's hands were shaking, but her voice stayed steady. "I know what happens to girls like me. I'm not stupid. At least here I have a chance." Caleb wanted to step in, to protect her from this conversation, but he could see she needed to fight this battle herself. So he stayed silent, rifle still in his hands, and let her speak. "Mr. Rowan," Coleman said, turning to Caleb, "is what she's saying true?" You planning to keep her here? Raise her? Caleb looked at Lila, this fierce, damaged girl who'd somehow become his responsibility, and maybe something more. Yeah, he said. If she wants to stay, she can stay. And if I say that's not acceptable, then I guess we have a problem. The standoff stretched. The deputy's hand moved toward his gun, but Coleman held up a hand to stop him. I could take her right now, the sheriff said. I have the authority. You could try, Caleb said quietly. Coleman's eyes narrowed. You'd fight the law over this? I'd fight anyone who tried to hurt her, law or otherwise. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Coleman sighed, heavy and tired. I'm not looking for a fight, Rowan, but this situation can't continue the way it is. You understand that? What are my options? You could apply to become her legal guardian. It would require going before a judge, proving you can provide for her, showing that she's better off with you than in county care. He paused. It's not a guarantee. Judge might say no, but it's the legal way to do this. Caleb processed this. And until then? Until then, I'm going to tell people in town what I saw here, that the girl appears healthy and well cared for. That might buy you some time. Coleman mounted his horse. But Rowan, if I hear anything that makes me think she's not safe, I'll be back. And next time, I won't be asking permission. He rode away, the deputy following. They disappeared into the trees and the clearing went quiet again. Lila was shaking, not from cold, but from the aftermath of fear and fury. Caleb set down his rifle and moved to her. You okay? Did I mess it up? Did I say the wrong things? No. You said exactly what needed saying. He put his hand on her shoulder. You were brave. I was scared. Being brave means doing the thing even when you're scared. That's what you did. He guided her back toward the cabin. Come on, let's get warm. Inside, Lila collapsed by the fire. Bear pushed his head into her lap, sensing her distress. She buried her fingers in his fur. Are they going to take me away? She asked. I won't let them. But the sheriff said, I know what he said, and we'll do it legal if we have to. Apply for guardianship, go before a judge, whatever it takes. Caleb sat down beside her. But nobody's taking you anywhere you don't want to go. I promise. You can't promise that. The law works for people, not the other way around. And if some judge thinks you're better off in an orphanage than here, then the law's wrong. Lila looked at him with those dark, serious eyes. Why are you doing this? Fighting for me? It was the same question she'd asked before, but this time Caleb had a different answer. Because you matter. Because in the 2 months you've been here, you've reminded me that there's more to life than just surviving. You've made this place feel like a home again, instead of a tomb. He stopped, trying to find the right words. I failed my sister. I failed my daughter by not being there when she needed me. I'm not failing you. But what if I'm not worth it? What if... Stop, Caleb said firmly. You are worth it. You're worth fighting for. And anyone who can't see that is blind. She started crying then, not the quiet tears she'd shed before, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere broken inside her. Caleb pulled her close and let her cry, feeling her small body shake against his chest. He used to tell me I was nothing, she said between sobs. Dale? He'd get drunk and say I was the reason everything went wrong, that I killed my mother by being born, that I was a curse. He was wrong. But what if he wasn't? What if I really am? Lila. Caleb held her at arm's length so she had to look at him. Your father was a broken man who took his pain out on you because you were there, and you were small, and you couldn't fight back. Nothing he said was true. Nothing he did was your fault. You are not a curse. You are not worthless. You are a strong, smart girl who survived something no child should have to survive. And I am grateful that you're here. She searched his face like she was looking for the lie. Really? Really? She cried for a long time after that, and Caleb just held her. Let her get it all out, all the poison Dale had poured into her, all the fear and shame and self-hatred. When she finally went quiet, she stayed pressed against his chest, exhausted. Are you going to send me away when I'm old enough? She asked quietly. Only if that's what you want. What if I never want to leave? Caleb felt something warm and painful expand in his chest. Then I guess you'll have to learn to like the cold. She almost laughed at that. a wet, broken sound, but a laugh nonetheless. That night, after Lila had fallen asleep, Caleb sat by the fire thinking about what he'd said to the sheriff. I'd fight anyone who tried to hurt her. He'd meant it. Somewhere in the past 2 months, this girl had become more than just a responsibility. She'd become his. Not a replacement for Emma. Nothing could replace the daughter he'd lost. But something new. Something he hadn't expected to feel again. February came with a brief warming spell that melted the top layer of snow and turned everything to slush. Caleb used the break in the weather to hunt, bringing down an elk that would feed them for weeks. He taught Lila how to butcher it properly, how to cure the meat so it wouldn't spoil. It's not pretty work, he said as she struggled with a particularly tough section. But it's honest work. Food doesn't come from nowhere. Something's got to die so something else can live. Did Sarah do this? No, she couldn't stomach it, but she learned to cook what I brought back, and she never wasted a scrap. He moved to help Lila with the knife. She would have liked you, I think. You've got her stubbornness. She was pretty, wasn't she, in that picture you have? Caleb kept a small daguerreotype of Sarah on the shelf, the only photograph he owned. Yeah, she was beautiful, but that's not why I loved her. Why then? Because she saw the world different than other people, saw possibilities where others saw problems. She's the one who convinced me we could build a life up here. He paused. And because she made me laugh. Even when things were hard, she could find something funny in it. Do you miss her? Every day. They worked in silence for a while. Then Lila said, Can I ask you something? Sure. That night in the cabin, the first night, why did you cry? Caleb's hands stilled. He'd thought she was asleep when that happened, when all the grief and rage he'd been carrying for 6 years had finally cracked open. You asked me if I was going to sell you, he said quietly, and I realized that's what you expected. That's what you thought happened when men bought girls, and He stopped, swallowed hard. I thought about my sister, about how she probably asked the same question when that man took her away. And I wondered if anyone had ever told her she was safe, if anyone had ever fought for her. Is that why you kept me? To make up for not saving her? At first maybe, but not anymore. He met her eyes. Now I keep you, because I can't imagine not keeping you. Lila processed this. I'm glad you bought me, she said, even though it's weird to say it like that. Yeah, it is weird. But true, if you hadn't... She didn't finish the sentence, didn't need to. They both knew what would have happened. The warming spell ended after a week, and the cold came back worse than before. March was brutal, storms that lasted days, temperatures that dropped so low the sap in the trees froze and made them crack like gunshots. They went through their wood supply faster than Caleb had planned, and by mid-month they were rationing. Lila started coughing. At first it was just a tickle, the kind that came from breathing cold air too long. But it got worse. Deep, wet coughs that shook her whole body. Caleb felt panic rise. He'd seen what sickness could do up here, how fast it could turn deadly. He made her stay in bed, piled blankets on her, kept the fire roaring even though it meant burning through wood they couldn't spare. He made tea from pine needles and yarrow, forced her to drink it even when she said it tasted like dirt. I'm fine, she insisted, her voice hoarse. You're not fine, you're sick. It's just a cough. Sarah said that too, right before... He stopped himself. You're staying in bed until this passes. But it didn't pass. It got worse. By the 4th day, Lila was burning with fever, her skin hot and dry. She couldn't keep food down, could barely stay awake. Caleb faced a choice. Stay in the cabin and hope she got better, or risk the 5-hour ride to Stone Hollow in the middle of winter to get help. He looked at the girl lying in the bed where his wife had died, looked at her flushed face and the way her breathing had gone shallow, and he made his decision. Bear, he said to the dog, you stay with her. Keep her warm. He bundled up, saddled Red, and rode out into the worst weather he'd seen in years. The wind cut like knives. The snow was so thick he could barely see 10 feet ahead, but he pushed the horse hard, following the trail by memory more than sight. He made it to town in 4 hours, faster than he should have been able to in those conditions. Found Doc Morrison's house and pounded on the door until the old man answered. She's sick, Caleb said without preamble. Fever, cough, can't keep food down. I need medicine. Morrison looked at him like he'd lost his mind. In this weather, Rowan, you're lucky you didn't die getting here. I don't care about the weather. I need medicine for Lila. The doctor sighed and went to gather supplies. He came back with a bag full of bottles and packets. Willow bark for the fever, this powder for the cough, mix it with warm water. If she's not eating, get broth in her any way you can. He paused. You sure you can make it back? I have to. Then take this too. Morrison handed him a small bottle. Laudanum, if the pain gets bad. But be careful with it. Too much and it'll put her to sleep permanent. Caleb rode back into the storm. The return trip was worse. Red was tired and the wind had shifted, blowing directly in their faces. Twice they had to stop because the horse couldn't see the trail. But Caleb pushed on, driven by the image of Lila lying alone in that cabin, getting sicker while he was gone. He made it back just after dark, stumbled inside to find Bear lying across Lila's chest and the girl barely conscious. I'm here, he said, moving to her side. I got medicine. He mixed the powder Morrison had given him and lifted her head to help her drink. She swallowed reflexively, coughed, tried to push the cup away. Come on, Caleb urged. Just a little more. It took an hour to get the full dose in her. Then he gave her the willow bark tea and sat beside the bed, watching her breathe. That night was the longest of Caleb's life. Lila's fever spiked and she started talking to people who weren't there, calling for her mother, crying about Dale, saying things that didn't make sense. Caleb kept cool cloths on her forehead and forced more medicine into her when he could. Somewhere around midnight, she opened her eyes and looked right at him. Are you going to sell me too? She asked. The question hit him like a fist. The same words from that first night, but now she was delirious with fever, trapped in some nightmare version of the past. No, he said, his voice breaking. Never. You're safe, Lila. I promise you're safe. Everyone leaves, she whispered. Everyone sells or leaves or dies. I'm not leaving. He grabbed her hand, held it tight. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. She closed her eyes again, and Caleb sat there holding her hand, feeling her pulse flutter against his palm. And he realized something that should have been obvious from the start. He loved this girl. Not the way he'd loved Emma. This was different, built on choice and survival and shared loneliness. But it was love nonetheless. And the thought of losing her terrified him more than anything had in 6 years. Don't you die on me, he said into the darkness. You hear me, Lila. Don't you dare die. The fever broke just before dawn. Caleb watched the color come back to her face, watched her breathing even out and deepen. When she finally woke up properly, the first thing she said was, You came back. Of course I came back. I thought, she coughed weakly. I thought maybe you'd leave me here. Caleb felt tears on his face and didn't bother wiping them away. I will never leave you. Not ever. You understand me? She nodded, too weak to speak. He held her then, this small broken girl who'd somehow put him back together. Held her while the sun came up and turned the snow outside to gold. And he made a promise to himself and to her and to whatever forces governed the universe. Nobody would ever hurt her again. Not while he was alive to stop it. When Lila was strong enough to sit up, she looked at him with those serious dark eyes and said, Thank you for saving me. You saved me first, Caleb said. And it was true, she had. Lila's recovery was slow. For days she could barely walk from the bed to the fire without getting dizzy. Caleb made her rest, brought her broth and tea, changed the damp cloths on her forehead when the fever tried to come back. Bear never left her side, and sometimes Caleb would wake in the night to find the dog pressed against her, keeping watch. By the time she could stand without swaying, March was bleeding into April, and the worst of winter was finally breaking. The snow started to melt in earnest, running off the roof in streams that sounded like rain. The days stretched longer. Birds appeared that hadn't been there before. I want to go outside, Lila said one morning. I'm sick of being stuck in here. You're still weak. I'm going crazy, please. Caleb studied her. She had color in her face again and her eyes were clear. All right, but just to the porch, and if you start feeling bad, you tell me immediately. They sat on the porch steps together, wrapped in blankets, watching the world wake up from winter. The sun felt warm on Caleb's face, the first real warmth in months. Ice dripped from the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a stream ran loud with meltwater. I thought I was going to die, Lila said quietly. You almost did. Were you scared? Caleb looked at her, terrified. Why? You barely knew me. Doesn't matter how long I've known you. Doesn't change what you mean to me. She was quiet for a moment. Then, what do I mean to you? It was a fair question. Caleb had been avoiding thinking about it too directly, afraid that putting words to it would somehow make it more fragile. But sitting there in the weak spring sunlight with this girl who'd survived things no child should survive, he couldn't dodge it anymore. Your family, he said. Same as Sarah was. Same as Emma. You're mine to protect and care for, and I take that seriously. Like a daughter? The word hung between them. Caleb had been thinking it for weeks, but hadn't said it out loud. Saying it felt like a betrayal of Emma somehow, like he was trying to replace her. Yeah, he said finally. Like a daughter. Lila leaned against his shoulder, and they sat there watching the snow melt. After a while, she said, I never had a real father. Dale tried, I think, before everything went bad. But he never... She stopped. He never looked at me the way you do. How do I look at you? Like I matter. Like I'm worth keeping alive. She pulled the blanket tighter. That's new for me. Caleb felt something crack open in his chest. You've always mattered, Lila. You just had people around you who were too broken to see it. They stayed outside until Lila started shivering. Then Caleb carried her back inside despite her protests that she could walk. She fell asleep by the fire, and he watched her breathe, still not quite believing she'd made it through. The next week brought more warmth and the first green shoots pushing up through the melting snow. Caleb started teaching Lila to ride Red properly, not just sitting in front of him, but actually controlling the horse herself. She was nervous at first. The animal was huge compared to her, but she learned fast. Heels down, Caleb called as she walked Red in a circle around the clearing. Keep your hands steady. He can feel everything you're feeling, so if you're nervous, he gets nervous. That's stupid. He's a horse. Horses aren't stupid. They just think different than we do. He moved closer. Now try making him trot. Squeeze with your legs. Gentle, don't kick. Red moved into a trot, and Lila bounced in the saddle, losing her rhythm. But she didn't fall off, and when she got the horse to stop where Caleb was standing, she was grinning. I did it. You did. Few more weeks and you'll be riding better than me. Liar. Maybe, but you're getting good. They practiced every day. Riding became one more skill in Lila's growing arsenal of mountain survival knowledge. She could shoot well enough now to bring down small game, could track animals through mud and snow, could start a fire with flint and steel, could read the weather by watching clouds and feeling the wind. She was also reading better. They'd gone through the fairy tale book twice and had moved on to the poetry. Some of it she didn't understand, but she liked the rhythm of the words. Sometimes Caleb would find her reading aloud to Bear, testing how the syllables sounded. Do you think I'll ever go to a real school? She asked one evening. Caleb looked up from the harness he was mending. You want to? I don't know, maybe. I like learning things, but... She gestured around the cabin. I like learning here too, from you. School would teach you things I can't, math and history, and how to write proper, things that matter if you're going to live in the world. What if I don't want to live in the world? What if I want to stay here? You're 11 years old. You've got time to figure that out. He set down the harness. But Lila, you should know, this place is hard. Beautiful, but hard. Not everyone's cut out for it. Are you trying to get rid of me? No. I'm trying to make sure you understand what you're choosing if you stay. Winters that try to kill you. Being alone most of the time. Working every day just to survive. It's not an easy life. Lila thought about this. It's easier than what I had before. That's a low bar. Maybe. But it's my bar. She met his eyes. I'm not leaving, Caleb. Not unless you make me. I won't make you? Then I'm staying. April turned to May, and with it came the real spring, wildflowers exploding across the meadows, trees budding green, the world suddenly loud with birdsong and running water. Caleb took Lila fishing in the stream that ran behind the cabin, teaching her to read the current, and guess where the trout would be hiding. There, he said, pointing to a spot where the water eddied behind a rock. See how it's calmer there. Fish like that. Less work to stay in place. Lila cast her line, she'd gotten good at it, and waited. The sun was warm on their backs. After the brutal winter, this felt like a gift. "Caleb," she said after a while, "can I ask you something?" "Sure." "That day the sheriff came, you said you'd fight anyone who tried to hurt me. Did you mean that?" "Yes." "Even if it meant going to jail? Or getting killed?" Caleb reeled in his line and cast again. "Yeah, even then." "Why?" "Because some things are worth fighting for. You're one of them." She absorbed this quietly. Then, "No one ever fought for me before, except you." "Well, you're stuck with me now." She almost smiled at that. Then her line jerked, and she scrambled to reel it in, fighting against a fish that was stronger than she expected. Caleb talked her through it. "Keep the tip up. Don't reel too fast. Let it tire itself out." When she finally hauled the trout onto the bank, it was bigger than her forearm. "I got it!" She was laughing, actually laughing. "Did you see that?" "I saw. That's a good fish. We'll eat well tonight." They caught 3 more before heading back to the cabin. Lila insisted on cleaning them herself, even though the work was messy, and she complained about the smell. Caleb watched her work and felt something warm settle in his chest. This was what normal looked like. This was what he'd been missing. That night they ate fried trout with wild greens Lila had learned to identify, and she talked about maybe building a proper chicken coop so they could have eggs. Planning for a future that included both of them, acting like this was permanent. And for the first time since Sarah died, Caleb let himself believe it might be. The trouble started in early June. Caleb had ridden down to Stone Hollow for supplies, something he'd been putting off but couldn't avoid anymore. They needed flour and salt and ammunition, things he couldn't make or trade for up in the mountains. Lila had wanted to come, but he'd made her stay behind with Bear. The town made him uneasy, and he didn't want her exposed to whatever talk was still going around. He should have known better. He was loading supplies onto Red when 3 men approached. Caleb recognized 2 of them, miners who drank at Mercer's. The third was younger, maybe 20, with the kind of face that looked for trouble. "That's him," one of the miners said. "The one who bought Dale's girl." Caleb kept loading, not acknowledging them. "Heard you're keeping her up there," the young one said. "All alone. Just you and a little girl." "Not your concern." "It's our concern when a man's doing unnatural things." Caleb's hands stilled. He turned slowly to face them. "You want to repeat that?" "You heard me. Everyone knows what men like you do with girls like that, and we don't tolerate it in this town." The rage that went through Caleb was white-hot and immediate. He took a step toward the young man, and whatever the kid saw in his face made him back up. "You don't know a damn thing about what happens in my cabin," Caleb said, his voice deadly quiet. "And if you're smart, you'll keep your mouth shut about things you don't understand." "We understand plenty," one of the miners said. "You paid money for a child. That makes her your property. And men don't keep female property around unless—" Caleb's fist connected with the miner's jaw before he could finish. The man went down hard, and suddenly the other 2 were on Caleb, fists flying. He fought back hard, landing punches where he could, but it was 3 against 1 and he was already tired from the ride. Someone grabbed him from behind. He threw an elbow and heard a satisfying grunt of pain. But then something hard hit the back of his head and the world tilted sideways. When his vision cleared, he was on the ground with Sheriff Coleman standing over him and the 3 men nursing various injuries a few feet away. "That's enough," Coleman barked. "All of you, stop." "He attacked us," the young one said, blood running from his nose. "After you accused him of child rape, from what I heard." The sheriff looked disgusted. "Get out of here, all 3 of you." They left, muttering threats. Coleman helped Caleb to his feet. "You all right?" Caleb touched the back of his head and his hand came away bloody. "Fine." "You're not fine, you're bleeding." The sheriff steered him toward Doc Morrison's office. "Come on." Morrison cleaned the wound and pronounced it not serious, a cut that bled a lot but wasn't deep. He also noted Caleb's split knuckles and the bruise already forming on his ribs. "You should press charges," the doctor said. "Against who?" 3 men who said what half the town's thinking? Morrison looked uncomfortable. "Not everyone thinks that way." "Enough do." Caleb stood up, wincing. "I need to get back." "To the girl?" "Her name's Lila." "Right, Lila." The doctor hesitated. "For what it's worth, I believe you're doing right by her. But Rowan, people are going to talk, and some of that talk is going to be ugly. You need to be prepared for that." "I am prepared. I just don't have to like it." He finished loading his supplies and rode out of town with his head throbbing and his anger simmering just below the surface. The accusation kept replaying in his mind. Unnatural things, like the only reason a man would help a child was to hurt her. By the time he reached the cabin, he was exhausted and furious and just wanted to forget the whole trip. Lila took one look at him and knew something was wrong. What happened? Nothing, just some trouble in town. You're bleeding. It's fine. She grabbed his arm before he could walk past her. Caleb, what happened? He told her. Watched her face go hard as he explained what the men had said, what they'd accused him of. They think you're... She couldn't finish the sentence. That's not true. You've never... I know it's not true. You know it's not true. But they don't care about truth. They care about what looks wrong. Lila's jaw tightened. So what do? We do what Sheriff Coleman suggested months ago. We go before a judge and make this legal. Apply for guardianship. Show them there's nothing wrong happening here. And if the judge says no, Caleb had been trying not to think about that possibility. Then we figure something else out. They spent the next week preparing. Caleb wrote out his petition in careful letters, explaining why he should be made Lila's legal guardian. Lila practiced what she'd say if the judge asked her questions. They both knew this was a gamble. Judges could be unpredictable, and there was no guarantee the law would see things their way. The hearing was set for late June in Stone Hollow's courthouse. Caleb wore his best clothes, which weren't saying much, and Lila wore the nicest of the dresses Martha Donnelly had brought. They rode down together in nervous silence. The courthouse was a small wooden building that smelled like old paper and tobacco. Judge Hendricks was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a severe expression. Sheriff Coleman was there, along with a court clerk and a handful of townspeople who'd come to watch. Martha Donnelly sat in the back row. When Lila saw her, the woman gave her an encouraging nod. Mr. Rowan, the judge said once everyone was settled, you're petitioning for guardianship of one Lila Pritchard, age 11, currently in your care. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor. On what grounds? On the grounds that her father sold her in a tavern and nobody else stepped up to help. On the grounds that she's been living with me for 7 months and is healthy and well cared for. On the grounds that she wants to stay with me and I want to keep her safe. The judge made a note. Miss Pritchard, you're old enough to have a say in this. Do you want to remain with Mr. Rowan? Lila stood up. Yes, sir. Why? Because he's good to me. He teaches me things. He makes sure I have enough food and warm clothes. He doesn't hit me or yell at me or treat me like I'm worthless. Her voice got stronger. Before Caleb, I thought I was going to die. Either my father would drink himself to death and I'd starve, or someone would buy me who'd hurt me worse. Caleb saved my life, and She stopped, swallowed. I want to stay with him. He's my family now. The judge studied her for a long moment. Has Mr. Rowan ever touched you inappropriately or made you do things you didn't want to do? No, sir. Never. Not once? Not once. Hendricks turned to Caleb. You live alone in the mountains, 5 hours from town. What happens if the girl gets sick, if there's an emergency? I ride to town and get help. I did it in March when she had fever. Doc Morrison can confirm that. Morrison, sitting in the front row, nodded. It's true. He rode through a blizzard to get medicine for her. And what about her education? The judge pressed. She should be in school, learning to read and write in cipher. She can read already and write. I'm teaching her math when I can, but I'll admit that's not my strong suit. Caleb straightened. If you want to make school attendance a condition of guardianship, I'll bring her to town every day during the school year. It'll be hard, but I'll do it. You'd ride 5 hours each way, every day? If that's what it takes. The judge made another note. Then he called Sheriff Coleman to testify. The sheriff confirmed that he'd visited the cabin, that Lila appeared well cared for, that he had no evidence of wrongdoing. Then one of the men from the fight stood up. Your Honor, I got something to say. Mr. Patterson, the judge said wearily, unless you have direct knowledge of abuse or neglect, sit down. I got knowledge of what's natural and what ain't, and a man living alone with a girl child ain't natural. Your opinion on what's natural is noted and disregarded. Sit down. Patterson sat, glaring at Caleb. The hearing lasted 2 hours. By the end, Caleb's head was pounding and Lila looked exhausted. Judge Hendricks reviewed his notes, then looked up. I've heard enough. Mr. Rowan, you're not an ideal guardian on paper. You live in isolation, you have limited means, and you lack formal education. Under normal circumstances, I would not approve this petition. Caleb's heart sank. However, the judge continued, these are not normal circumstances. Miss Pritchard was failed by her father and by this community. You stepped in when no one else would, and from what I can see, you've done right by her. He paused. I'm granting guardianship with conditions. First, Miss Pritchard must attend school during the academic year. I don't care if you have to build a cabin in town to make that happen. She needs proper education. Second, you will bring her to town once a month for Sheriff Coleman to verify her well-being. Third, if at any point I receive credible evidence of abuse or neglect, this guardianship will be terminated immediately, and you will face criminal charges. Do you understand these terms? Yes, Your Honor. Miss Pritchard, do you understand? Yes, sir. Then it's settled. Mr. Rowan, you are now the legal guardian of Lila Pritchard. Don't make me regret this decision. The gavel came down, and suddenly it was official. Lila was his, not just in practice, but in law. They walked out of the courthouse into bright sunshine. Lila grabbed his hand, something she rarely did in public, and squeezed tight. We did it, she said. We did. You're stuck with me now. Wouldn't have it any other way. Martha Donnelly approached them as they were mounting red. Congratulations, both of you. Thank you, Caleb said, for speaking up in there. I told the truth. That girl deserves a home, and you're giving her one. She handed Lila a small package. Little something to celebrate. Nothing fancy. Inside was a new dress, deep blue with white buttons. Lila held it up, and her eyes went bright. It's beautiful, she said. You deserve beautiful things, Martha said. Both of you take care. They rode home in the golden afternoon light. Lila was quiet, but it was a peaceful quiet. When they reached the cabin, Bear came bounding out to greet them, and Lila hugged the dog so hard he yelped. Easy, Caleb said, laughing. You'll squeeze him to death. I'm just happy. I can see that. That night they celebrated with a special dinner, venison steaks and the last of the potatoes, cooked with wild onions Lila had found. She wore her new dress, even though it was too nice for every day, and she smiled more than Caleb had ever seen. What happens now? She asked. Now we figure out how to make this work. I'll need to build something in town for the school year, like the judge said. Probably just a small room we can use during the week, then come back up here on weekends. Can Bear come? Don't see why not. She thought about this. Will kids at school be mean to me because of... She gestured vaguely. Everything? Maybe. Probably. Caleb set down his fork. But you're tougher than they are. You've survived things they can't imagine. Don't let them make you feel small. What if I can't keep up? What if I'm too far behind? Then you work harder. Ask questions. Learn. He met her eyes. You're smart, Layla. Smarter than you give yourself credit for. You'll do fine. She didn't look convinced, but she nodded. The summer stretched out warm and green. Caleb taught Lila to fish with her hands in the shallow parts of the stream, to identify edible mushrooms, to predict when a storm was coming by the pressure in the air. They expanded the garden Sarah had started years ago, planting vegetables that would be ready before the first frost. Lila grew stronger, filling out from the half-starved waif she'd been. She could outshoot Caleb now with the rifle, though he'd never admit it out loud. She could ride Red on her own through the mountain trails without getting lost. She could make a fire in the rain and field dress a deer without flinching. She was also reading everything she could get her hands on. Caleb traded furs for books during his monthly trips to town, bringing back whatever he could find. Lila devoured them all, histories and novels and agricultural guides, anything with words. One evening in late July, she looked up from a book about astronomy and said, "Did you know there are billions of stars we can't even see? That the ones we see are just the closest ones? I did not know that. It's amazing. All that space, all those worlds we'll never get to." She gazed out the window at the darkening sky. Makes our problems seem pretty small, doesn't it? Sometimes small problems are the only ones we can actually fix. She smiled at that. Then more seriously, "Are you happy with me being here?" Caleb looked at her. This girl who'd gone from a terrified child being sold in a tavern to a confident young person who could survive in one of the harshest environments on Earth, who read poetry to her dog and asked questions about stars and looked at him like he hung the moon. "Yeah," he said, "I'm happy. Happier than I've been in a long time." "Good, because I'm not going anywhere." "I know." August brought the first hint of fall. Cooler nights, leaves just starting to turn. Caleb started preparing for winter again, stocking wood and preserving food. But this time he wasn't doing it alone. Lila worked beside him, and the work went faster with two sets of hands. They were stronger together, and whatever challenges came next, whether it was another brutal winter or the judgment of narrow-minded townspeople or the simple daily struggle of survival, Caleb knew they'd face it as a family, because that's what they were now. Not by blood or law alone, but by choice. By the 1,000 small decisions they'd made to keep showing up for each other. By trust built slowly over months of hardship. One morning near the end of August, Lila came running into the cabin with something in her hands. "Look," she said, breathless. It was a bird's nest, fallen from a tree, with 3 tiny blue eggs still intact inside. "We should put it back," Caleb said. "Can't. The tree's too tall and the branch broke off. The eggs will die if we leave them." She looked up at him with those dark, serious eyes. "Can we try to save them?" Caleb knew the odds weren't good, knew that interfering with nature usually ended badly, but he also knew that sometimes you had to try anyway, even when success wasn't guaranteed. "All right," he said. "We'll try." They built a makeshift incubator near the fire and took turns watching the eggs, keeping them warm. Lila read everything she could find about birds and their development. Against all odds, one of the eggs hatched 3 weeks later. A tiny, ugly, perfect thing, with its eyes still closed and its mouth open wide. Lila named it Hope. She fed it mashed worms and kept it warm, and somehow the bird survived. By October, it had feathers and was hopping around the cabin, chirping constantly. Lila taught it to come when she whistled. "What happens when winter comes?" she asked. "It should migrate south, but it doesn't know how." "Then it stays here with us," Caleb said. "We've already saved one thing that shouldn't have survived. Might as well save another." Lila smiled at that, the kind of smile that lit up her whole face. And Caleb thought about how far they'd both come from that November night in Mercer's tavern, how they'd built something neither of them had expected out of desperation and determination and the simple human need to matter to someone. They'd saved each other, and in doing so, they'd found what they'd both been missing, a place to belong. The bird made it through winter, which nobody expected. Hope lived in a small cage Caleb built near the warmest part of the cabin, and Lila spent hours teaching it tricks and talking to it like it understood every word. Maybe it did. Animals were smarter than people gave them credit for. School started in September, and it was harder than either of them anticipated. Caleb rented a room above the general store in Stone Hollow, barely big enough for 2 bedrolls and a small stove, and they spent Monday through Friday there so Lila could attend classes. The other kids stared at her the first day, whispering things they thought she couldn't hear. Bought girl. Mountain trash. Rowan's charity case. Lila came back to their rented room that first afternoon with red eyes but a set jaw. "How was it?" Caleb asked. "Fine." "Lila." She threw her books on the floor. They hate me. They think I'm dirty and stupid and that you're..." She stopped. "It doesn't matter what they think. It matters if it's hurting you. I don't care if it hurts. I'm not leaving." She sat down hard on her bedroll. "The teacher, Miss Warren, she's nice. She said I read better than most kids my age, but the others..." Her voice cracked. "One of them asked me how much you paid for me, like I was a horse." Caleb felt rage flash through him, but he kept his voice calm. "What did you say?" "I told her it was none of her business. Then she said, 'Everyone knows what men do with girls they buy,' and I..." Lila looked up at him with fierce eyes. "I hit her, right in the mouth. She bled everywhere, and now I have to apologize tomorrow, or Miss Warren says I'll be expelled." "Are you sorry?" "No, she deserved it." "Then don't apologize for hitting her. Apologize for doing it at school where it causes problems for the teacher." Caleb sat down beside her. "But Lila, you can't go around punching everyone who says something ugly. You'll spend your whole life fighting." "Maybe that's fine with me." "It's not fine. You're better than that." He paused. "People are going to talk. They're going to say things that aren't true and make assumptions that hurt. You can either let that make you hard and angry, or you can prove them wrong by being exactly who you are: strong, smart, good. What if who I am isn't good enough? You're good enough for me. That's all that matters. She leaned against his shoulder, and they sat there in silence while the sounds of the town filtered up through the floorboards: horses in the street, people arguing, someone playing a fiddle badly. "I miss the cabin," Lila said quietly. "Me too." 3 more days and we'll go back. Those 3 days felt like months. But Friday finally came, and they rode up the mountain with Bear running ahead and Hope chirping from a small basket Lila had fashioned. The cabin appeared through the trees like an old friend, and Caleb felt tension he hadn't known he was carrying finally ease. This was home, not the rented room in town, not the courthouse where a judge had granted him guardianship. This place, with its log walls and stone chimney and the graves under the pine tree out back. Fall slipped into winter and they fell into a rhythm. 5 days in town suffering through school and suspicious looks, then 2 days in the mountains where they could breathe. Lila's reading and mathematics improved rapidly. She had a hunger for knowledge that surprised even Miss Warren, but she never made friends with the other students. They'd decided who she was that first day, and nothing she did changed their minds. "Do you think it'll always be like this?" she asked one Sunday as they walked through fresh snow, checking trap lines. "Like what?" "People judging me for things I didn't choose, for being sold, for living with you instead of a normal family." Caleb stopped walking. "Probably. People are good at holding on to their judgments, especially when it makes them feel superior. But here's the thing, their opinions don't define you. You define you. And anyone who can't see past their own prejudice isn't worth your time. Miss Warren says we should try to understand people who are different from us. That compassion matters. Miss Warren's right. But compassion doesn't mean letting people hurt you. There's a difference between understanding why someone's cruel and accepting their cruelty." Lila thought about this as they walked. Dale used to say people were cruel because life was cruel, that we were all just trying to survive, and sometimes survival meant stepping on whoever was weaker. Dale was wrong about a lot of things. But was he wrong about that? It was a harder question than it seemed. Caleb had seen enough of the world to know that desperation made people do terrible things. But he'd also seen kindness in impossible places. Sarah giving their last food to a stranger. Martha Donnelly bringing clothes for a child she barely knew. Doc Morrison riding out in a blizzard because someone needed help. "I think survival's important," he said finally. "But it's not the only thing that matters. How we survive, who we become in the process. That matters too. Dale chose to save himself by selling his daughter. That's survival, sure, but it's the kind that costs you your humanity. I'd rather die than become that." "What if you had to choose between surviving and staying good?" "I don't know. I hope I'd choose good, but I've never been tested that hard." He looked at her. "Why are you asking?" "Because I want to know if you'd ever—" She stopped. "If things got really bad again, if we ran out of food or money or whatever, would you—" "No," Caleb said firmly. "I would never sell you or hurt you or give you up to save myself. Never. I'd find another way or I'd die trying." "How do you know? You can't know what you'd do until you're actually there." "I know because I've already made that choice. I made it the night I bought you out of that tavern. I made it every time I've chosen you over the easier path." He stopped walking and turned to face her directly. "Lila, you are not a burden I'm carrying until something better comes along. You're my daughter, and there is nothing that would make me give you up. Do you understand?" She nodded, but there were tears on her face. "I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm like this. Why I keep waiting for you to—" "Because everyone else in your life did. Your mother left. Dale sold you. You've learned that people leave and hurt and disappoint, so you're waiting for me to do the same." He pulled her into a hug. "But I'm not going anywhere. You're stuck with me until you're old enough to decide you don't want to be anymore." They stood there in the snow while Bear circled them impatiently, wanting to get back to checking traps. Eventually, Lila pulled back and wiped her eyes. "Okay," she said. "Okay. Okay, I believe you." It was a small thing, those words, but Caleb knew how much they cost her. Trust didn't come easy when it had been broken as many times as hers had. Winter that year was brutal but manageable. They had plenty of wood and food, and the lessons Lila had learned during her first winter made the second one easier. She knew how to conserve heat how to ration supplies, how to keep busy during the long dark months when going outside meant risking frostbite. She also kept improving at everything Caleb taught her. By January, she could track a deer through snow and bring it down with a single shot. She could predict weather changes hours before they happened. She could survive alone if she had to, which was both reassuring and terrifying. Caleb wanted her to be capable, but he also wanted her to need him. Selfish, maybe, but true. "You're getting too good," he said one day after she'd outshot him 3 times in a row. "There's no such thing as too good at survival." Fair point. "Besides, you taught me everything I know, so really, you're just impressed with yourself." He laughed at that. "When did you get so smart-mouthed?" "I've always been smart-mouthed. You just didn't notice because I was too scared to show it." "I like this version better." "Me too." Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it brought news. Sheriff Coleman rode up to the cabin on a warm April morning while Caleb and Lila were working in the garden. "Sheriff," Caleb called, standing and brushing dirt from his hands. "Something wrong?" "Depends on your perspective." Coleman dismounted. "Dale Pritchard's dead, thought you should know." The words hung in the air. Lila had gone very still, her hands frozen in the dirt. "How?" Caleb asked. "Liver finally gave out. Doc Morrison said it was a miracle he lasted this long with how much he drank." The sheriff looked at Lila. "I'm sorry, miss. I know he wasn't much of a father, but still—" "I'm not sorry," Lila said, her voice flat. "Is that wrong?" Coleman shifted uncomfortably. "It's honest." "Did he—" She stopped, started again. "Did he ever ask about me after?" "No, miss, I'm sorry." Lila nodded like this confirmed something she'd already known. Then she went back to planting seeds, her movements mechanical. After Coleman left, Caleb sat down beside her in the dirt. "You okay?" "I don't know what I'm supposed to feel. I hated him for what he did, but he was still my father. Shouldn't I be sad?" "There's no should when it comes to feelings. You feel what you feel." "I feel—" She struggled with the words. "Empty. Like there was this question I never got to ask and now I never will." "What question?" "Why wasn't I enough? Why did he look at me and see a burden instead of a daughter?" She looked at Caleb with tears in her eyes. "What was wrong with me?" "Nothing was wrong with you. Everything was wrong with him." Caleb took her dirt-covered hands. "Your father was broken, Lila. Broken in ways that had nothing to do with you. Some people, when they break, they take everyone around them down too. That's what he did. But it wasn't your fault. It was never your fault." "Then why does it hurt?" "Because you're grieving. Not for who he was, but for who he should have been. For the father you deserved but never had." She cried then, and Caleb held her while she mourned a man who'd never deserved her tears. It wasn't fair that she had to carry this pain. But life wasn't fair. All you could do was hold on to the people who mattered and keep moving forward. That evening, Lila asked if they could go to Dale's grave. "You sure?" Caleb asked. "I need to say goodbye or something. I don't know." They rode to Stone Hollow the next day. Dale had been buried in the town cemetery, his grave marked with a simple wooden cross. Someone, probably the church, had paid for it. Dale's name was burned into the wood along with the dates. Dale Pritchard, 1845 to 1891. Nothing else. No beloved father or cherished husband, just a name and dates. Lila stood looking at the grave for a long time. Caleb stayed back, giving her space. Finally she spoke, her voice quiet but clear. "I wanted to hate you forever. I wanted to never forgive you for what you did, but I can't hold on to that anymore. It's too heavy." She paused. "I don't forgive you. Maybe I never will. But I'm letting go anyway, because carrying this around is killing me, same as the drink killed you." She stood there a moment longer, then turned and walked back to where Caleb waited. "I'm done," she said. "All right, let's go home." They rode back to this cabin in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Lighter, somehow. Like Lila had set down a weight she'd been carrying since the night Caleb bought her out of that tavern. Summer came, and with it, Lila's 12th birthday. She'd never known the exact date. Dale had never celebrated it, so they picked one together. June 15th, the longest day of the year. Caleb made a cake using precious sugar and eggs he'd traded for, and they ate it on the porch while watching the sunset laid over the mountains. Make a wish, Caleb said. Lila closed her eyes. When she opened them again, she was smiling. I wished I could stay here forever. That's a good wish. Will it come true? If you want it to, yeah. This is your home for as long as you want it to be. She leaned against his shoulder, comfortable in a way she never would have been a year ago. Tell me about Sarah again, about when you first met her. Caleb had told this story before, but he didn't mind telling it again. I was working construction in Denver, and she was a school teacher. I met her when I was helping build the new schoolhouse. She kept coming by to check on the progress and giving us advice we didn't ask for. She sounds bossy. She was, in the best way. He smiled at the memory. I fell in love with her the day she argued with my foreman about the window placement. Said the children needed more light, and she didn't care if it was structurally complicated. She won that argument too. Would she have liked me? She would have loved you. You've got her stubborn streak. Good. I'm glad I'm like her. They sat there until the stars came out, more stars than anyone in the city ever saw, spread across the sky like spilled salt. Hope chirped from inside the cabin, and Bear snored at their feet, and everything felt right in a way that had nothing to do with perfection and everything to do with belonging. The second school year was easier. The other students still whispered, but Lila had stopped caring what they thought. She focused on learning, on absorbing everything Miss Warren could teach her. She excelled at reading and writing, struggled with mathematics, but worked until she understood it, surprised everyone by showing a talent for drawing. Miss Warren pulled Caleb aside one day in November. She's remarkable, Mr. Rowan. The progress she's made, I've never seen anything like it. She works hard. It's more than that. She's hungry for knowledge in a way most students aren't. Given the right opportunities, she could do anything. Go to university, become a teacher herself, whatever she wanted. Caleb felt pride swell in his chest, but also something that might have been fear. She say what she wants? When I ask, she says she wants to live in the mountains with you and her dog and her bird, nothing else. Miss Warren hesitated. Mr. Rowan, I'm not saying that's wrong, but I'd hate to see her limit herself because she doesn't know what else is possible. I won't hold her back. If she wants to leave someday, go to school somewhere, make something of herself, I'll help her do it. But you're not encouraging it. I'm encouraging her to be happy. If that means staying in the mountains, then that's what it means. Miss Warren looked like she wanted to argue, but didn't. Just promise me you'll make sure she knows she has choices, that she's not trapped. She knows. I've told her 100 times. But had he? Or had he been so relieved by her insistence on staying that he hadn't pushed her to imagine alternatives? The thought bothered Caleb all the way back to their rented room. That evening he brought it up. Miss Warren says you could go to university if you wanted, that you're smart enough. Lila looked up from her homework. I don't want to go to university. But if you did, I don't. She set down her pencil. Why are you bringing this up? Because I want to make sure you're staying because you want to, not because you think it's your only option. It's not my only option. It's my choice. She met his eyes. I know what's out there, Caleb. I know there are cities and schools and all kinds of things I haven't seen. But I also know what makes me happy. And it's not sitting in a classroom full of people who look down on me. It's being in the mountains with you. That's where I belong. Now you belong there. But you're 12. What about when you're 16, 20, 30? Then I'll still belong there. She softened her voice. I know you're worried I'm limiting myself. But Caleb, you gave me a life. An actual life where I matter. And I'm safe and I can be myself. Why would I trade that for something else just because other people think I should? He didn't have a good answer for that. So he just said, as long as it's really what you want. It is. The conversation stuck with him, though. He started paying more attention to how Lila talked about the future, looking for signs of doubt or longing for something different. But if they were there, he couldn't find them. She seemed genuinely content with the life they'd built. Maybe that was enough. Maybe wanting more for your kid than they wanted for themselves was just what parents did. But it didn't mean you were right. 2 years passed. Lila grew taller, filled out, started looking less like a child and more like a young woman. She was 14 now, confident and capable and fiercer than anyone Caleb had ever met. She could outshoot most men in Stone Hollow, could track anything that moved through the mountains, could survive alone for weeks if she needed to. But she also still read poetry to her bird. Still talked to Bear like he was a person. Still sat with Caleb on the porch, watching sunsets and telling him about things she'd learned that day. One evening in late spring, she asked him about Ruth. Your sister, the one your father sold. Do you ever wonder what happened to her? Every day for years. Less now, but yeah, sometimes. Do you think she's still alive? I don't know. She'd be... He did the math. 46 now. Maybe she's fine. Maybe she built a good life somehow. Maybe she's dead. I'll never know. Does that bother you, the not knowing? It used to. Ate me alive, actually, but I've made my peace with it. I did wrong by her, but I can't fix it now. All I can do is try to do better going forward. Lila was quiet for a moment. Then, I used to think about my mother that way, wondering where she went, if she ever thought about me. But I realized something. It doesn't matter. She made her choice. I'm making mine, and my choice is this. You, us, this life. You're sure? I'm sure. She looked at him with those serious dark eyes that had seen too much too young but had somehow stayed kind anyway. You know what I figured out? Love isn't about blood or obligation. It's about showing up. You showed up for me when nobody else would. You kept showing up even when it was hard. That makes you more my father than Dale ever was. More my family than anyone who shares my blood. Caleb felt his throat tighten. I'm not perfect, Lila. I've made mistakes. Still make them. So what? Everyone makes mistakes. The difference is you try to fix them. You try to be better. She smiled. You gave me a home when I had nothing. You taught me to survive. You made me feel like I mattered. That's not perfect, but it's more than good enough. They sat there in the fading light, and Caleb thought about all the choices that had led them here. His choice to speak up in that tavern instead of looking away. Lila's choice to trust him despite every reason not to. The 1,000 small choices they'd both made to keep building this family out of nothing but determination and need. None of it had been smooth. They'd fought and struggled and nearly broken more than once, but they'd survived. And in surviving, they'd found something worth fighting for. Thank you, he said. For what? For giving me a reason to keep going. After Sarah and Emma died, I was just existing, going through the motions. You reminded me what it felt like to actually live. You did the same for me. They sat there while the stars came out, while Bear snored and Hope chirped and the mountain wind moved through the pines. And Caleb thought about Sarah's voice all those years ago. You're a good man, Caleb Rowan. Don't you forget it. He'd forgotten for a long time, but Lila had helped him remember. The following winter was mild, and by the time spring came around again, Lila was 15 and talking about maybe becoming a teacher herself someday. Not in the city, in Stone Hollow or one of the other mountain towns where kids needed education but didn't have access to good schools. I could make a difference, she said. Help kids who are like I was. Give them a chance. You'd be good at it, Caleb said. You think? I know. She started helping Miss Warren after school, working with the younger students who struggled with reading. She was patient and kind, and somehow knew exactly how to explain things in ways that made sense. The kids adored her, and their parents grudgingly admitted she was helpful. The town's opinion of Lila had shifted over the years. She was still the girl who'd been bought in a tavern, but she was also the girl who'd survived in the mountains, who could outshoot grown men, who helped teach their children. Respect came slowly, but it came. On Lila's 16th birthday, Caleb gave her something he'd been working on in secret, a rifle he'd built himself, carved with her initials on the stock. It's beautiful, she said, running her fingers over the smooth wood. Every woman who lives in these mountains needs a good rifle. That one's yours. Take care of it, and it'll last you 50 years. I'll take care of it. She looked up at him. You know what else I want for my birthday? What's that? I want to officially change my name to Rowan, so it matches yours. Caleb felt something warm explode in his chest. You sure? I've been sure for years. I'm not a Pritchard. I never really was. I'm a Rowan, your daughter. I want it to be official. They went to the courthouse the following week and filed the paperwork. Judge Hendricks, older now, more gray in his beard, signed the order himself. Miss Rowan, he said when it was done, I'm glad things worked out the way they did. I wasn't sure that day in my courtroom if I was doing the right thing, but looking at you now, I know I did. Thank you, Your Honor, Lila said, for taking a chance on us. On the ride back to the cabin, Lila kept saying her new name out loud. Lila Rowan. Lila Sarah Rowan. She'd chosen Sarah as her middle name, wanting to honor the woman she'd never met, but who she felt connected to through Caleb's stories. Sarah would have been honored, Caleb said. I hope so. She paused. Do you think Emma would have liked me if she'd lived? She would have loved having a big sister, would have driven you crazy with questions and following you everywhere. I wouldn't have minded. They rode in comfortable silence, and Caleb thought about how strange life was, how loss could destroy you but also crack you open enough to let something new grow, how the worst moments could lead to the best ones if you were brave enough to keep going. He'd lost Sarah and Emma. That pain would never fully go away, but he'd gained Lila, and she'd brought him back to life in ways he never expected. Maybe that was the thing about family. You didn't always choose how it formed or who became part of it. Sometimes family chose you. Sometimes it showed up in a tavern where a drunk man was selling his daughter, and you had to decide in a split second what kind of person you were going to be. Caleb had made his choice, and he'd never regretted it, not once. That evening on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains they both loved, Lila turned to him and said, You know what the best part of my life is? What? That when I think about my future, you're always in it. Every version I imagine, you're there. That's how I know I'm home. Caleb pulled her into a hug, and she hugged him back just as hard. You're stuck with me, kid, whether you like it or not. I like it, she said. I more than like it. They sat there until the stars came out, the same stars they'd watched together for years, the same mountains surrounding them, the same wind moving through the pines. But everything was different now, better. They'd both been broken when they found each other, both desperate and damaged and convinced they didn't deserve good things. But they'd fought for this. Built it piece by piece out of trust and determination and the simple human need to matter to someone. And what they'd built was strong enough to last. Years would pass. Lila would eventually become a teacher, would help dozens of kids who needed someone to believe in them. Caleb would grow old in the cabin he'd built with Sarah, surrounded by the life he and Lila had made together. There would be hard times still. There always were. But they'd face them together, the way family did. Because that's what they were. Not by blood or obligation or law, but by choice. By showing up day after day and choosing each other over the easier path. In a world that had tried to sell a child for $20, they'd proven that some things couldn't be bought or sold. That worth wasn't measured in money or status or what other people thought. That family was built by people who loved you enough to fight for you, even when, especially when, it was hard. Caleb had been given a second chance at being a father. Lila had been given a chance at having one. And together, they'd built something that mattered. Thank you, Lila said into the darkness. For what? For seeing me when everyone else looked away. For thinking I was worth saving. Caleb squeezed her shoulder. You were always worth saving, Lila. I just happened to be the one who noticed. No, she said. You were the one who cared enough to do something about it, and that, Caleb thought, was the real difference. Not in seeing problems or recognizing injustice. Anyone could do that. The difference was in stepping up anyway, even when it was inconvenient or difficult or risky. In choosing action over apathy, in deciding that one person could make a difference, even if it was just in one small life. He'd saved Lila. But in doing so, she'd saved him right back. The stars wheeled overhead. Bear stretched and yawned. Hope chirped sleepily from inside. And two people who'd been broken and lost and convinced they'd never matter to anyone sat together on a porch in the Rocky Mountains, watching the night deepen and knowing they were home. Not because of where they were, but because of who they were to each other. Family. Chosen, fought for, earned, perfect in its imperfection, and worth every difficult step it took to get there.